Awesome. All right. So it is now 9:35 on October 30th. And I'm, as the chair of the Prescription Drug Affordability Board, calling the meeting to order. For introductions, my name is Gary Merchant. I am a state legislator and also chair of this board. And to my left,
Attorney Todd Fahey.
Representative Jess Edwards.
I guess ex-professor Bob Woodward.
and on the Zoom,
Former State Senator Tom Sherman.
and in a quorum, we have myself, Attorney Fahey, and also Representative Edwards. There's 3 of the 5, which we have a quorum. As far as the agenda review, is there anything on the agenda people would like to add, delete, modify, or discuss?
I do have a question.
Sure.
Down, you have review of 3 LSRs.
Yes,
Is one of those mine?
yes.
Okay.
Is there any other?
I have a question. Is there any
Sure.
chance we can move that LSR review up so I
Sure.
can participate?
Could do that.
Unless that's okay.
Nope. So let's do this on the agenda. Where's my agenda? So on the LSRs, we'll move that from before the discussion on the annual report. Is that okay with the board?
Mhm.
Okay. In saying that, let's review the October 2nd minutes. I don't think there's anything on the 16th, correct?
Correct.
Correct. So on the October 2nd meeting, I believe they're in your packet.
Mhm.
If you would like to review those, I would need a motion on the floor to approve them or edit them or modify them.
So as an alternative, can I make such a motion? Because I'm not.
Good point. Thank you. Thank you for reminding me of that. I will promote Dr. Woodward from an alternate to a board member for today's meeting only. Also on the Zoom, I will promote Dr. Sherman from an alternate to a board member as well for voting reasons for today.
Actually, I think I'm still a board member, aren't I? Until
Yeah, you
November
are.
1st.
Yes, you are. So we don't need to promote you. You are promoted.
You can promote me if you like. I'm not sure where you can go above volunteer, but that's
So moved. We have a motion on the floor from Dr. Ed Woodward to approve the minutes as published.
Second.
Second from Attorney Fahey. All those in favor say aye.
All right.
Aye. Any opposed?
I
Ayes have it. Moving on to the agenda for the LSRs, we have 3 LSRs that I bring to the board's attention that impact this board in some capacity, and Representative Edwards, one of those is your LSR. And if you'd like to, you could begin to address that one. And that LSR, by the way, is the one dealing with up in the right-hand corner, 24-2648. Right there.
Okay, so I submitted this bill. I think I have a co-sponsor of Representative Peter Leishman. I had asked for some other co-sponsors. I don't think they came out, but the point of this bill is that we have some very nice language in the current statute relative to no conflicts of interests, and they're well defined, but there's no enforcement mechanism at all. And so this was my opening effort to get that conversation going of, okay, if you're going to say no conflict of interest, what will you do should there be one? And so what the bill does is it basically empowers the governor to remove somebody if there's been a conflict of interest with approval of the GNC. And that's an unusual thing. I don't know that there's any other board that has that feature. So So maybe the committee will come up with an alternative method. But I don't really care how it gets done, just that there ought to be a mechanism for enforcement. And then the other thing it does is it extends, there's a spousal declaration in there that spouses should also need to declare conflicts through their spouse on the board. I added cohabitants because increasingly people enter long-term relationships at this age that don't end up in marriage, but create every bit as much of a spousal conflict. So I believe if this got passed with a cohabitation clause, it would be the first RSA to have one, which I think is just good long-term policy for the state anyways. But that's kind of a new thing. I don't know if the committee's going to want to take that on or not when they hear it, but those are kind of the two big rocks in this LSR.
Dr. Sherman?
Yeah, I have a general concern for LSRs coming from board members. We have sort of traditionally, and maybe we should make this an annual tradition, met before the filing period and thought about what we need. I think every year or every 2 years, we may have an upgrade or an update to the statute as we experience it. So rather than having these come up now, and this is what I wanted to discuss in December, I would love it if the board stayed unified. And I would love it if all the legislators could sign on to board-related bills, so we're not sitting there in testifying against a board member's bill, or that seems, sort of counterproductive. On this, so I would just ask that in the future, going forward, if there's legislation being filed by legislative members of the board, which is not a requirement of the LSR, of the statute, anyone who has the qualifications can be a member of the board or potentially be a member of the board. I would just love to see us be more unified and proactive and thoughtful about when we file these LSRs, that we're all on board and that it's coming from the board with one of us filing. We've done that before and it worked really well. And it also allowed us to file both in the House and in the Senate. So I would love to see that go forward. Maybe that's a dream. The second part is specifically on this LSR. I actually think it's a step in the right direction, and I agree with the representative that the conflict of interest doesn't have teeth. A couple of questions, and if you can scroll down a little bit, there's I have it up on one of my devices here. There's a place where I don't have any problem with the cohabitating. I think that may be just bringing us into the current era, or maybe the era of 20 years ago. But there was one phrase, and maybe it would make more sense for me to work with Representative Edwards just on this, because it's not, it just didn't make good grammatical sense to me. I think it's line 25, section C. It says a conflict of interest shall be disclosed in the following circumstances or manner. And the grammar doesn't make sense, because it really is manner. And I don't know how circumstances works out with 1, 2, and 3 below. I think manner worked, and I'm not sure circumstances is necessary. The second part is that, the Speaker of the House, the President of the Senate have appointees to this. And if it's their appointee who has a conflict of interest, not only do I think it would be a quicker action than having the governor and council do it, it also would be, it's their appointee, and I think they would object to having their appointee removed by the governor and council. So my recommendation for the way that this works would be down on the second page, line 20 through 30, I guess, or 29, is that somewhere in there, and this is what we did when we had a conflict of interest and we asked a member to resign very early on. The conflict of interest was highlighted by a member of the public. It was brought to the attention of the chair. The chair consulted with the Department of Justice, the Attorney General's office. It was determined that the concern had merit, and the member was asked to resign, and this is where Representative Edwards' bill would be really effective, would be if that member said, well, I'm not going to resign, I don't agree, then I think the system should be that when the something like when the Department of Justice has determined that the person does have a conflict and should not be serving on the board, then the appointing officer, the governor, the president of the Senate, or the Speaker of the House would then unappoint or remove that person because it's their appointee. So it goes back to the person who had the power to appoint them in the first place. It doesn't kick over to the governor and council. And that's much more consistent with what we do with other commissions or committees. I served on a commission where the governor's appointee was really acting out, and it was a member of the public, and the governor said, your appointment has been revoked and I'm appointing somebody to replace you. But having that step in there where the Attorney General verifies that there is a disqualifying conflict of interest, I think would take this away from some of the politics, and then having it go back to the appointing officer keeps it within the purview of that officer rather than having the governor remove an appointee of the speaker or the president. Does that make sense?
Oh, if that's to me, sure. I'm not married to the how part. I'm just trying to make sure that there is an enforcement mechanism, and I'm happy to do it in whatever way seems to make the most sense, keeping in mind that what I'm trying to do is to make sure that we don't do political retribution every 2 years with house cleaning, that there's an actual reason for early termination of an appointment. And then back to the circumstances or manner, you have to remember the way I end up doing LSRs is I usually am sitting up at about 4:30 in the morning with or without coffee, reading this stuff and trying to figure it out. And when I read it the first time, it seemed like there were also in those bullet points descriptions of circumstances and not just manner. So that's why I inserted it. But but I'm open to that. Now, so going all the way back to your initial idea about there being a professional courtesy and a way of doing business with each other to submit LSRs, to build LSRs from the board level and then go with a united front. I'm okay with that, with a sort of a first effort kind of thing. I don't know that I would make that mandatory, but because sometimes conflict can occur, and I think it's okay if the board doesn't approve everything in lockstep. So, but I agree with the professional courtesy aspect of it, Dr. Sherman, and to that end, I did think I asked Representative Merchant Senator Abbas, Senator Rosenwald. The one that should be offended is Senator Carson, because I never got around to her. So I did fly this by legislators beforehand. In my experience, submitting it was okay because it can always be withdrawn before you get to the House phase. And so we're reviewing it now. We still have the option to just withdraw it. And the other thing I've done before is when I've written a bill and it was clear that an amendment was required, I would get the amendment drafted early so that when I introduce the bill to the committee, I would say there's been continuing work and I think you really ought to look at this amendment to the underlying bill. So I don't believe the board's hands are tied in any way at this point.
No, and thank you for that. If I may jump in, I in every commission, committee, and board I've served on that's legislative, the process of getting a bill through has been sharply enhanced, not by lockstep, but by coming to agreement and unanimity. Lockstep doesn't mean that, to me, means that somebody tells me what to do and I have to do it. I would much prefer to do the discussion, come up with a, really talk about the bill, the idea, because I really believe that this has merit and I hope it goes through, but I'd love to see some of those changes and have the, on the specific bill, have this, number one, have a non-political or relatively non-political arbiter, which would be the Department of Justice, who we do have as somebody we can, a group we can go to, say, yes, per your statute, this meets the criteria for a conflict of interest, and then have the appointing person be the one who does the removal. I think that's less political than if you have the governor removing the speakers or the president's appointees. And it does produce just a little bit of protection for the person who's a board member, that they won't be removed for solely political reasons. But what I'd love to do, Representative Edwards, is maybe you and I could work on the language a little bit. And if the board is in agreement that this has merit, we could work on the language and present an amended version or amendments or new language or additional language at the December meeting.
I'm all fine with that. Whatever you want to do, Mr. Chair. And to Dr. Sherman, if you just want to propose alternative language, I personally, as the bill sponsor, I'd be open to considering it.
So
Great, thank you.
So, is my understanding, I do agree with what both of these are talking about. The bill has merit. There's no doubt about that at all. I think there's a question about how it gets drafted. One of the things I would say is the Attorney General review would be an important thing, because it's neutral, should be a neutral party. And at that point in time is that they find a conflict. The question, I think, for the board is drafting this language is shall be removed or may be removed. I think it comes back to is what the appointee, in other words, coming from the Speaker of the House, President, Senator, or the governor, is really their call which way they want to call that. But the AG's office is basically at that point in time saying we see a conflict of interest, at least potential for one. It goes back to the body or the person who made the appointment for them to make the ultimate decision. And take it away from us. One of the things I do think is kind of challenging is I don't see any definition of what cohabitating means.
That was going to be I recall the Big Bang. It's a television program, Geeks, where Leonard had a young woman that was in essentially and he was saying no, she's not. And I don't know if Sheldon or the young lady was going through and saying, how much space does she have in the closet? How much space does she have in the bathroom cabinet? What happened to your geeky, you know, ended up giving up. So the definition of I was wondering whether there's not a legal state definition of cohabitation to which this should refer.
There may be some in our special investigations unit statutes that deals with public benefits. So I can take a look at that for you.
That'd be great. And I'm not a lawyer. So when I send this to OLS and I know they have drafting attorneys, I assume some sort of common sense test on their part.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, but there's definitely some sort of definition out there somewhere. I just need to find where it's at.
Yeah, so a few points. I appreciate the conflict of interest, but I think we ought to be, and I'm glad we're talking about having a mechanism and as well as a flagging, but I also think that, people are serving as volunteers on this board, and I think there ought to, in addition to there being a neutral arbiter in the AG's office or DOJ, I do think that there ought to be a trigger if a person fails to disclose or recuse. And I think maybe it's already in there. I haven't studied it in depth, but most people are not going to come on and willingly engage in a conflict of interest. And the situation in many cases in the law of New Hampshire is that it's for the decider of fact, in some cases, to recuse upon determination of a conflict of interest. So you just don't want to draft in a way that sort of presumes that people are going to get onto this board with bad intent to somehow profit, because there's a lot of other considerations in the statute that would make that very unwise. So, and I think maybe in the drafting you can work that out, but in the prior case where we had the conflict that was pointed out, I think that was justifiable, but I think that person was an alternate. I think
Yes.
who was on and also, and truly had the conflict, and it was right to come off by virtue of that conflict, but was a really great resource for this board, worked quite hard, so I just think that's something we ought to be aware of, because you don't want to chill people's desire to get on these boards. The last thing I would want to see is that if I came onto this board, and I'll just say, in my case, that I come on as not a legislator, and I'm trying to do my best to serve, giving up my time, right, with no agenda. And then I'm somehow caught in the middle of a political firestorm where I have the governor and council on front page news. Who's going to want that? So you want to give people the opportunity to do the right thing and presume sometimes maybe they don't know if they have a conflict, right? So having said all that, I'm not worried that I'm going to be that person. But if there's another in the future, I just think it's something we should think about.
So to understand your position, would you strike from the existing statute the not having a conflict of interest? That would be the easiest way to clean it up. It's just to say, yeah, you can have a conflict of interest. I don't think you're arguing that.
No, so the thing about conflicts, and I lectured on this and wrote about conflicts. Some conflicts are navigable, but the conflict that's the most nefarious is the one you don't disclose. Right? Like you have it's a conflict and you don't disclose it, and then people all of a sudden look at you and they say, well, look, you're acting in a way to be beneficial to yourself or to your organization, or there's an appearance of impropriety. The less nefarious was when people say, look, there's a disclosure, and it may well be a conflict, but it may not be. So I just, want to be careful that we don't end up having a really good board member who might have what appears to be a conflict, and then somehow they get removed because, we're very divided today politically. So I just throw that out there. At the end of the day, it's the board's decision, but I do worry about people who have no particular political inclination here being caught in a political crossfire to the detriment of the board and its work. Does that make sense? Yeah. So.
The other thing I saw in here too is the fact that we don't really define what a gift. If it's $25 or if it's $50, somehow it has to be something that's objective and not subjective.
You mean in the current statute? I think gifts are defined with a dollar amount somewhere.
Yeah, RSA 15B handles that. I think it's under $25 is presumed to be not a gift, but
De minimis, yeah.
Right. As
And there's a
long
ton of
as
that.
it's tied back to, what I'm saying is this ties back to that, that's all I'm trying to get to, just so we don't,
It's my intent.
okay. So at this point in time, you're gonna be working with Dr. Sherman with some sort of language, maybe bring it back on December 18th and we can talk about it at that point.
I like that idea. I'd say it a little bit differently. I put something forward.
Yeah.
Dr. Sherman has some, good ideas about it. I'm open to hearing what Dr. Sherman says, because I'm not a good listener. If he could put it in writing, it would be even more effective.
And I think at this point in time, because of the filing, that would be an addendum to this LSR. So when it gets introduced to the House, it still has to go as an LSR.
An amendment, not
Correct,
an
it's an
addendum.
amendment, sorry, an amendment,
Yes,
correct?
I believe so.
So December 18th, we'll be talking about the amendment to the LSR. Not changing the
If
LSR.
there's a proposed amendment, yes.
Dr. Sherman, you okay with that?
He's on mute.
Yeah, I'm happy with that. Also, I think Attorney Fahey had some really good points. So, coming up with some language, and then, I don't think I'm going to be the one qualified to look at the appropriate language for what is it? The cohabitant. I know there's actually an interesting study committee looking at the rights of cohabitants. And back in the military, they had a thing called POSSLQ, which was person shared living quarters, opposite sex, or something like that. A person of opposite sex shared living quarters. That was the military term for it, but I don't know if we have a legislative definition. I agree with that concern. But I'm also not qualified to do that part of the amendment. So my focus would be on just how somebody could be removed. And so maybe we can come up with a draft amendment and circulate that well before the December 18th meeting so we can discuss amending the amendment.
The cohabitation piece, I'm open to just dropping it from this because it's a statewide issue. And I just figured as long as I was touching a bill, I would highlight it to the legislature. But I don't think we necessarily have to be the one to solve the cohabitation problem for the state.
Right. So my focus would just be on that last part, if that's okay with you and the board, and then and I'll see if I can come up with some language. And again, I think it's much more powerful for all these LSRs if the board is able to reach a unanimity and support than if we're testifying against another board member's bill. I just think it looks better for the board and it's more likely to get the bill passed.
All right, any more discussion on LSR 24, 26, 48? Okay. There are two more LSRs, both of them I've introduced, so I guess I'm also under the gun. As far as what Dr. Sherman said, it was not my intent to do this without the board's involvement. I did run a couple of these by some of the board members, but not the board itself collectively. Let's look at LSR 24, 23, 36. What I'm trying to accomplish here is that we have a 2-year window of time for the executive director. I wanted to strike that so that at this point in time, as long as the board's in place, the executive director's position would remain in place. Number two, on the funding mechanism, was the fact that we started out having funds coming from fees, which are not taxpayer dollars, but coming from the individuals overseen by the board. That was struck in House Bill 2. We supplemented that with $250,000 per year, courtesy of Representative Edwards, putting some funds into the general funds. So therefore, because we have funds in the general fund now, there's no reason to have that, which would be lines 10 through 17, that we could strike. And I sent the LSR back to OLS to strike 10 through 17 because we have the funding. The other one too is, I think, back to being the first, I don't know of any other time in which a contract goes to fiscal committee in addition to the governing council. So that was the intent, is to be consistent with the standard we have today, is that contracts are reviewed by the governor's council, not by the fiscal committee. So we'd have the same continuity. And those are the two things.
Three,
Three things, one's been struck.
do you want to talk, may I talk about? to them?
Sure you may.
Okay, as you and I talked offline, not a 91A violation, but as you and I were talking offline.
Right.
I said that I think the 2-year limitation is appropriate until after we complete the redundancy review to make sure that we believe that the PDAB has been constituted with the proper scope of responsibility and until you really scope the PDAB's role and what it's going to be doing in the future, I think it's premature to determine the level at which you need leadership and the continuity of that leadership. So on the 2-year issue, I'm just not there yet. And I could be by the time that redundancy review gets done, and then I have points on the other 2 items.
The question I have is a timing issue about the redundancy report. I believe it has come out October 1st of 2024. If that report comes out, by the time it gets ready to file something and get it to another LSR to extend it, that'll be until 2025 at least, possibly longer.
Yeah,
Because it's just a cycle. So that's my reason for trying to strike the 2 years. Somehow be sure that we don't have a situation where we mean well. The redundancy report supports having an executive director, if you will, but we don't have the timeline within the legislative timeline to make it work.
okay, so if I may, I understand that there could be a timing issue.
Yeah.
Okay, the way I would rather handle a timing issue, should we end up agreeing that there is one, and you're probably right. I'd rather see an extension of the 2-year limitation to like 3 years or 4 years. I'm not ready to make it permanent until the final report is on redundancy is done. So I'd be open to extending the length of the executive director even before that report is completed, but I'm not prepared. I don't think I know enough to make it permanent for me to support permanence. On the funds issue, there was an intentional decision that was supported by Division 3 of the Finance Committee and by the whole Finance Committee to make this board funded by general funds. That was intentional. So I don't know anything that's changed that would change that very intentional decision to have this board funded through general funds instead of through fines or whatever we're calling the taxes. So I would not change the funds.
Right.
And then in terms of,
Edwards, just
Okay.
to be clear, I've already sent this back to LSR, back to OLS.
Yeah.
To strike 10 through 17.
oh, I misunderstood. I'm just looking at what I'm seeing. I'm
That's
sorry.
not stripped on
Yeah.
what we've handed out here.
Correct. Correct, I know, that's another copy.
So it sounds like we're agreeing to agree.
On the fund, yes.
Oh,
We
well,
can't,
that's unusual. I don't know how to handle that.
we can't do that. It's a point of order. We don't-
Yeah, is that allowed?
But that was on the calendar, right?
All right, and then on the contract thing,
Yes,
I'm all for consistency. And a lot of times I'm not a master of exactly how things are supposed to get done or how they get done. So I just sort of wing it the best way that makes sense to me. So if there's an argument for shifting how the contracts get signed off that is consistent with how New Hampshire does it, I have no issue with that.
yes,
Sort of along this line, not having heard result of the job offers. Yeah, I don't know the status of that. But I guess I should be able to ask at this point of whether the 2-year contract seems to have been a impediment in the hiring process. Is that not an issue?
That has not been an issue.
Okay.
My concern though is that it's a timing issue.
I agree with you. I was looking for, if it had been an issue, it would strengthen the case. I'm happy with a 4-year as a compromise, instead of a 2-year,
Mhm.
to be able to say funding exists for 4 years.
Yeah, incrementally 2 more years. So,
Um,
because it's in law now, it's to make it.
Add an extra, yes, an extra 2 years,
To be a total of 4 years.
yes.
Yeah.
That's all.
I could support that too.
I'm okay with that.
Okay with that?
That gives us
Two.
time, when the.
2 more years.
No, 2 things we're gonna bring up.
Oh, no. Because we have to shut things down.
Dr. Sherman, are you okay with?
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in on, I think at least 4 years. I don't understand the dependency on the redundancy review, but 4 years would satisfy everyone. Then I'm fine with 4 years. I think 2 years makes it more difficult to recruit, but I doubt it is a complete stop to recruiting. I don't believe it has been a complete stop to recruiting. And I would just point out that on all 3 LSRs, very quickly with a meeting of the board and probably less than an hour, actually at this point, about 40 minutes worth of work, we have come to unanimity and a plan to move forward on all 3 LSRs, and which I think underscores at least some board level discussion, because the points that everybody has made on all 3 LSRs have been really helpful. I think, as is usually the case when you bring these LSRs out in the open and people can talk about them and discuss them with the sponsors, they get better. And so I would go back to encouraging at least this level of board discussion well before LSRs move to hearings. And I think the discussion this morning demonstrates the utility of that, because I think we've come to some level of how we can work together moving forward so that we do reach unanimous consent on moving forward with all 3 LSRs. So great job, board.
Well, there's a third point, and that's the contract issue. So if we're looking at language in this one to modify the contract approval process to be consistent with the state, I'm okay with that too. So we've got 3 for 3, not 2 for 2.
We got 2
We're 3 for 3. Yeah.
3 for 3 within this
It's
LSR.
LSR, yes.
And then there's one more LSR to discuss.
So we may actually get a home run here.
Yeah.
Grand slam. So. Hat-trick, hockey man. So LSR 24, 23, 20. What came to my attention in going through biologics? It's sort of it's quiet or silence is probably the better way of saying it in the FDA. To give you an example, when you have a generic drug today, the manufacturer of the generic drug has to demonstrate bioequivalency. In other words, the drug that you have is going to work in someone's body comparable to the brand name. Same blood levels, same peak and troughs and everything else. Plus, it has to have the same composition. So you have a brand name drug, and then you have a generic. And then you have another generic, and you have another generic. They only have to prove themselves as being bioavailable to the brand name, not amongst themselves. Because biologics are not really chemicals, but they're proteins, it's difficult to show that the protein is the same as the other, although it acts the same way. So the FDA has done what they call interchangeability. So if you can demonstrate that your product is comparable to the innovator's product, it works clinically the same way in the human body through trials, then you can have it called interchangeable. So I can have this Humira and interchangeable A. And I can also have interchangeable B. So I put a little graph together to sort of show this. So what ends up happening is you've got biologic up here, it's interchangeable here, it's interchangeable here, but not here.
Okay.
So what I wanted to do in the law, Dr. Sherman, I don't know if you can see this or not. But what I'm trying to do in the law is to be clear where it's sort of silent in the FDA. That if you have an interchangeable product with the innovator. That the interchangeable products themselves are interchangeable with each other. Right,
So we're talking statistics on each of these arrows that you've drawn.
yes,
And it is at least possible conceptually that you can have two products that are interchangeable with the brand name product. Two equivalents that are interchangeable with the brand names. But if you tested them against each other, they could be different. For example, product A, this interchangeable product A could be better than the brand name, and interchangeable product B could be worse. So by the time you compared B with A, they would not be equivalent.
it's interesting you say that because they did a mega analysis looking at biologics to begin with biosimilars.
Okay,
They found out there was very little difference in safety margins between products being switched.
so
This is,
So
it's an empirical
Didn't-
it's
question,
a question.
but but the fact that the FDA has approved equivalence of two arrows is not sufficient evidence to suggest that all A's and B's. I'm not saying that they're not equivalent, that they can't be equivalent. I'm saying neither of those, but just having this information is insufficient for specific products to say A and B are going to be equivalent.
However, I hear you saying. That argument doesn't hold you to with generics today.
Right.
There's study between product A and product B that are generics. There's no requirement by the FDA to prove these two products are equal to each other. All they have to do is prove that they're equal to the brand name.
Right.
So I'm using the same logic, saying that if you have a product that's been shown to be interchangeable with the brand, then they themselves are interchangeable with each other. Because
Yeah, this-
within the. But
didn't this come out of the presentation? It's just, it's something that many states are doing. To make sure that interchangeable products can be used for interchangeable products. That they're interchangeable with other interchangeable products. Right now, they're running into this situation where they have an equally effective biologically equivalent product that they actually can't use just because the one that was prescribed was not the brand name. And that was what was discussed in our last, what was that? Back in early October when we had that presentation. I think this makes perfect sense. And I think these are all approved drugs and approved substitution products. It's just that they can't get past this artificial speed bump that really is truly artificial. It shouldn't be there. And that's what this LSR does, is it gets us past that regulatory speed bump. That's not
basically,
necessary. Yeah.
good.
There's no, and I defer to the scientists on this, but there's no concern about when you get further away from the, call it the.
No, right.
There's
No,
no-
you're not further away. You're actually equidistant. If you have Humira and you
Right.
have one that is essentially biosimilar to Humira, and you have another one that's biosimilar to Humira, all three are biosimilar. But you can't go, and I don't have the graphic in front of me, it doesn't show up, but this bill is just a common sense decrease in regulation that decreases access to less expensive pharmaceuticals.
Yeah, no, I guess my point, Dr. Sherman, was that, and I hear that. So I was just suggesting or asking that if you have a biosimilar off of the brand name drug,
Right.
it's not, it is by definition a biosimilar, right? So chemically, it's not
Correct.
exactly identical. And then
Correct.
if you're matching the one that is not identical, but merely biosimilar, is there any concern or risk there? And you're saying, no, it's basically equidistant, right? To use your phrase.
Yeah.
Okay,
Right.
There's a
Thank you.
difference in biosimilar and an interchangeable one.
okay,
Because the interchangeable biosimilar has been shown through studies and demonstrated to be equal between that and the innovator.
got it.
Something that's
Yeah.
biosimilar is like it, but has not been through the ringer, if you will, to show that it has the bioequivalency that way. So
Yeah,
I'll read
I
something.
think though, I'm sorry.
Well,
This is off the FDA about generic drugs. So Dr. Woodward, you have a really good point. And this is coming off their handout. Any generic drug modeled after a single brand drug must perform approximately the same in the body as the brand name drug. There will always be a slight, but not medically important, level of natural variability, just as there is for one batch of brand name drug to another batch of brand name drug. This amount of difference would be expected and acceptable, whether for one batch of brand name drug tested against another batch of same brand or generic. So the saying, there's a variability.
Okay,
But the saying is that as long as they've been shown to be equivalent to the brand name drug within the reasonableness of variability, then it's acceptable. So I'm saying is there is going to be some level of variability, but what the FDA is saying is that as long as it's interchangeable, and that's what my argument is, that it's basically within the realm of reasonableness.
great.
A
Great.
quick question.
Yeah.
If I'm a physician prescribing something that does what Humira does, why don't I prescribe Humira and give the pharmacist the chance, the opportunity to choose among the three products? Humira, biosimilar interchangeable A, biosimilar interchangeable B.
You raised, that's a really good point. Part of it's going to be that a lot of times when every single biologic in itself is a brand name. So when the company goes out to market their product, they're going to market their brand of it. So when this happens, to your point, company here is going to market its name right here, not this one.
Yeah.
So when that happens, and the script comes in for this one here, and I have 4 other ones equal to Humira, the only one I can interchange it with will be Humira. I won't have the opportunity as a pharmacist to make the changes over here.
So why do physicians?
Right, actually, physicians may know that there's a biosimilar that's typically less expensive. So they might put down that, in fact, I've done this before, when I'll say the biosimilar of infliximab or Remicade came out, we stopped using Remicade as a word, which was based on statute, and what we've learned here was probably a mistake because it did decrease the options available to the pharmacist, because we don't have this LSR in statute. Once this LSR is in statute, I can write for, if what I'm trying to give is infliximab or Remicade, or, it's all the same or biosimilar. And I don't have to know which one is the least expensive. The pharmacist will be able to use the one that is least expensive for that patient's insurance panel and PBM, based on the type of drug I'm trying to prescribe. And it won't be up to the physician to know which biosimilar is actually the least expensive for the patient. So I think certainly the reason in my experience that we would, as physicians or as nurse practitioners or PAs, write for one that's a generic or non product name like Humira or Remicade or one of those is really because we're trying to get to the biosimilar and get to the less expensive option. But under current statute, it actually decreases the options available to the pharmacist.
So that's the intent of that LSR, is to allow for things that are considered by the FDA to be, again, interchangeable. A biosimilar, Dr. Woodward, is not part of that.
Okay.
So now, if you have a biosimilar that has been through the gauntlet with the FDA to show interchangeability through studies, that's off the table. It's only the ones that have shown the interchangeability.
Okay.
All right,
It's a great bill.
I'm just trying to find where, I would say the biggest opportunity we have going forward is gonna be biosimilars or biologics, if you will. I think last time we looked at the numbers, is about 52% of the drug spend is actually in biologics. It's not in chemicals anymore. All right, so moving on to board appointments, I wanted to give you folks an update. We do have Dr. Sherman has been reappointed as an alternate, and Senator Roosevelt has been reappointed as the board member, effective November 1st for 5 years. No, sorry, 3 years. I need to talk to Senator Bradley about that, because my understanding is it's the 5 years per the law, and what I have here is actually only for about 3 years. But I'll talk to Senator Bradley about that. In regards to the annual report, now, Dr. Woodward, I saw you had some notes that you wanted to go through. Did you want to address them on some of the things as Ms. Fleur to be able to pull it up?
I shared my comments on the draft with you and with Dr. Aziz. And I would be glad to share them more widely. I think rather than taking time of the board sort of going through detailed points, I kind of the opinion of Representative Edwards that doing it in writing would be a more effective way to get feedback.
We have 48 hours.
I'm ready to.
I mean, we have November 1st deadline.
So from my point of view, I have made the suggestions that I think should be made. It's really a question of the board, and we can go through them quickly if you can fire stuff up.
Can we rewind just a second?
Of course.
Because I'm sort of a new kid. I'd like to make sure I understand. I see Nancy's name on here. I assume Nancy took a lot of input. Who would you consider the prime author of the draft?
Two of us.
Two of
Well,
us?
three of us. So the
4 of us, actually, because there's Dr. Woodward did your part, Dr. Aziz did his part, I did my part, and then Ms. Fleur did her part, which is pulling all the minutes together. So all the appendages and so forth that are attached here was her pulling our board minutes together, our presentations together.
Okay, so to summarize, it sounds like all the sections probably have the right subject matter experts on top of it. But is there an issue with maybe smoothing them to integrate it into a cohesive document, or is that sort of just going to happen naturally?
When you say cohesive document, how would you make it different?
No, this is my question. It's not a statement. If we have 4 sections of this that have been done by the subject matter experts, and those are nice standalone stovepipes.
Yeah.
I'm just asking the question because I've not read this yet. Do you believe that it also does a nice job of kind of integrating and smoothing so that each of the sections make sense in context of one another? Having drafted a lot of things in a multi-party way, it's that integration piece that sometimes gets missed.
So perhaps we could just page through really quickly and talk about how things exist now. The pictures, they're great pictures, have been useful for a couple of years. Table of contents is obvious. Executive summary is representative merchants doing executive summary, and introduction is representative merchants. The meeting, monthly meeting summaries is Ms. Plourd's. Starting on what is at the bottom of page 6,
Yeah,
the historical background, page 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 are mine.
okay,
Page 12, 13, 14, and 15 are mine.
okay,
The page 16, 17, 18, 19 is Jason S's.
Yeah.
Page 21, 20, 21, and 22 are representative merchants. And there are supplemental appendices that are not included in this printed version, which are essentially the presentations that have been made that are on the webpage.
so I guess this comes back to Representative Merchant. Do you think your executive summary has set up a nice summarization of the work of Dr. Woodard and Dr. Aziz? Do you think your executive summary is solid in terms of considering those additional components? Kind of,
Yes and no. I would say in regards to their silos and their stovepipes, as you call them and so forth, they stand on their own. You're asking the question, was that dealt with in the executive summary to their stovepipes? No.
okay,
Okay, part of it is by executive summary dealing with what the board at a very high level versus getting into what you're trying to get, I think you're trying to address, Representative Edwards, is part of the stovepipe in the document itself.
right,
Okay. In an executive summary, we try to make it no more than a page long,
right,
and given the magnitude of this report, it'd be difficult to get it, in my opinion, distilled down to a page. But
That's a great question that you ask, and I wonder if we should just say in the executive summary that, you know, that given the density and the complexity of the subject matter, the reader is encouraged to read on,
that works.
that would be fine.
right? So then people just don't stop with the executive
Right,
summary.
right,
It's just-
because most people do, right?
They do, everybody does.
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah, we can. I would like to word that.
Given the complexity and of the subject matter, the reader is encouraged to read the full report. And not rely on this executive summary.
One sort of textual modification for Ms. Lord would be the table of contents has Roman numerals 1 through 9. But the executive summary, for example, doesn't have a Roman numeral 1 up in front of it. The introduction doesn't have a Roman numeral 2 in front of it, just making them consistent. So the table of contents and the headers of the sections are consistent.
One of the things that is here, you talk about the right side margin. Having that,
Pages.
Yeah.
that was one of the things that just more of a formatting, it wasn't
Sure,
content.
yeah, I had considered that, and I with the time constraints.
It was hard.
So my
I
thing-
could make edits to each person's PDF that they sent me. I did feel that the page numbers were adequate to bring you to where you need to go, but I'm happy to make that change.
This is a guy who used to worry about that very same thing, you know, finalizing a report. The other thing you could do, maybe just get rid of the Roman numerals in the table of contents if they're not actually creating a reference or a link to the document.
That's a good point.
That would be the easiest way.
Yeah, that works. Yeah.
One last. You think it might you, I'm sorry, Tom, might you?
No, go ahead.
Might you attribute the authorship of the subsections? Because I mean, you're all subject matter experts. It might give a little more credibility.
Actually, Dr. Aziz did that,
He did.
and one of my modifications, it was to, copy what his, attribution was, style, at the bottom of my sentence.
The only thing I was gonna is.
It's a good point.
It's a good point.
Gary, really quickly, I'm gonna have to scoot, but I don't know if somebody picked this up already. I haven't actually had this version to look at, but I'll look at it tonight. I think in the executive summary, it says memorandum of outstanding,
Oh,
as,
yes, it does.
which is, I've never seen a memorandum outstanding, but I think it's supposed to be an MOU, not an MOO.
It is.
It was, we should insert left field.
Yeah,
That's an outstanding typo. I love it. I'd like to have more of those
That's
memoranda.
what happens at 2:00 at night.
It's a nice piece of work.
All right, I'm gonna have to scoot. Great
All right, thanks.
seeing y'all, and I'm thrilled that I get to keep working as an alternative. It's great. Thanks so much.
Safe travels, Doctor.
Safe travels. Did you want to go through your comments?
Sure, I think if you click on the comment on the right, it will go to the high text that's the comments on. Yeah, so click on, so that it highlights it. The way I believe the way the bill is worded is that it implies price increases corresponding to the consumer price index or the medical care component of the consumer price index, plus a reasonable percentage for inflation. I'm saying that's twice, inflation's been double counted there. And I don't think there's much we can do about it at the moment, but just to highlight that.
I think what I hear you saying, Dr. Woodward, is that more into what I call drug inflation itself? No, is
Medical care services
Would be a-
includes drugs,
does.
but it's not prescription. Prescription drug is a subset of medical care services. So in the history,
Mhm.
medical care services have been substantially less than the prescription drug component.
So how would you want to rephrase that?
Uh,
I think is that taken right out of the statute?
yes. We can talk about that. This is a note. It doesn't,
Yeah, You raise a
it
good
doesn't
point,
need to
though.
be, it doesn't need to be solved right now.
but it ties back to the discussion about my LSR. If it be, I guess since I already have a bill dealing with the PDAB. If we want to put that in an amendment to clean up the double count of inflation in the statute, why not?
One of the things, Representative Edwards, that this sort of conversation goes to is, do we need to actually go back and modify that whole phrase in there,
In the statute,
in the statute?
that's what, and I'm just saying, if so, then we have a vehicle.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
are you looking, Dr. Woodward, just for that set of words, or looking for the whole process of looking for inflation in general? The way we measure something?
It brings up the bigger issue, and if asked to comment, I would replace reasonable, or it needs to be worked.
Okay.
Two alternatives. One, talk about, instead of medical care services, talk about the prescription drugs.
Okay.
That's directly to prescription drugs, but that's always looking backwards. If the other alternative is, instead of reasonable percentage for inflation, have some reasonable percentage for new technologies.
Do you have some thought, would you?
I'd be
mind
glad
if you don't work with Dr.
Yes.
Edwards.
Senator, I'll take senator.
President.
Is that, so the two, you could work on some language,
glad
bring it
to.
back for the December 18th meeting?
Yes,
To talk about it.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
okay. If you click on the next, just click down, we can go through this quickly. So the numbering of headings, I'm just saying this heading is reflecting the outline that we put together. so that the board knew kind of where this section fit. They need to be renumbered. That goes back to the headings, just need a consistent heading. If you click on next, pardon,
We're removing that.
Yeah.
so just maybe just remove that.
yes,
Do you want to add, like we did with the other one, Dr. Aziz, do you want to, think we should recognize yourself as the content?
yes, I have text further on down.
Okay.
So if you click the next one, we're gonna go click. The New Hampshire's, there's apostrophe S in there that I don't think it's needed. Click the next one. Just click on it, yeah. So, for many years, I would say, replace many years with 20 years following 1960.
Yeah,
And then click the next one. I just delete that. I had hoped that we would have some discussion in the board about what's going on in the prescription drug Medicaid or in New Hampshire, which differs. If you go up on the graph a little bit, they just scroll up on the graph. So you can see that this is Medicaid as a percentage of GDP in the US and in the state, and the states dropped way off. It has always been below, but in the last few years, there's something going on. And the question, I was hoping we could have some discussion. I don't have a good explanation. The question is whether there's something about managed care that got in there, that the national statistics aren't really representative of the New Hampshire data that's given to the nation that I can see isn't a good picture of what's actually happening, because in particular, prescription drugs get folded into the managed care and not reported separately on the managed care plans, which was what Henry Lippman was suggesting. I'm saying just delete that. The answer to that question for me is just delete that highlighted text.
so Dr. Ward, for the person who's gonna look at this graph and immediately see that conclusion that there's this weird deviation
Right.
going on, shouldn't we offer some sort of acknowledgement at least that we see the deviation and it requires further
This
study?
last sentence here, an apparent deviation from the national trends, I've written here, New Hampshire's Medicaid expenditures as a percent of New Hampshire's GDP dropped sharply between 2015.
all right.
And I was hoping we could have an explanation.
So I was reading, please delete, so I was
No.
thinking that you wanted that explanation deleted.
That's highlighted in that I had left in italics because
Okay.
it was a comment that looking for comments from the board.
One of the things maybe to is in there, this may require further investigation.
Sure.
That way there,
Yes,
or somehow phrase it that way, is that, you know,
that sounded
it's
good.
an interesting artifact, if you will, but we don't know why.
That's satisfactory. Yeah,
Sounds good.
I agree.
So,
Just help the reader out.
Am I making sense or?
Yes,
Can you just that again, so I don't have to review the video?
this is, go ahead.
but what I say,
This needs further, well, the board looks forward to reviewing this in the future.
there you go,
I like that.
yes. It's caught our attention, we just don't understand why.
Yeah. Next one. This is just a renumbering issue. We've already solved that. Go on to the next one. As I read this, it's like gobbledygook to me. I've suggested, if you go back up to that text that you just clicked. Yeah, so we can see all of that. I'm replacing the highlighted with the text in quotes there.
All right,
That's,
I apologize for that.
it reads,
Typo, it should be in 2022, not on 2022.
Yeah, if I could type, I would be good.
It's okay. Brilliant other one.
this is not outstanding.
Yeah, so click on the next one, underline, that's a drug, we've been underlying the drugs above. Click the next one, yeah. So scroll down in the text if you would. Let's see, I don't. No, I think it's screwed up, ignore that. I don't have any comment.
Small point, when we reference drugs that are branded, shouldn't we put a trademark
Yeah.
sign next to them or something? Or whatever the mark is, so we recognize that that's a protected mark,
Yes.
copyright,
I
trademark, whatever
agree.
it is,
I agree with the suggestion.
throughout the document.
Yes. And the next comment is that paragraph at the bottom. It just, this,
That
yes, click that one that's highlighted there. I'm saying just delete it.
That doesn't add anything at all?
It doesn't add anything at all. No, it's actually material of that paragraph is in the first paragraph of this subsection.
All right,
And then this is the acknowledgement following Jason's format, right?
Yeah.
So now we're into my comments on Jason's. I was asking Jason to be more specific, rather than saying a significant share is in the medical benefit. The Representative Merchant has talked about 40 or 50%. I think putting a number in there is much more impactful than just saying significant.
What it can do is the insurance department actually has a report that may or may not be ready for this past year. We can go and grab that number. Grab it.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
talking to Jason here with respect to what I would hope he would be able to fill in.
Is he couldn't be here today, was sure he's gonna be, is he around, you know?
He's on vacation this week.
Yeah,
He's definitely on his way over. Yeah, or it should be in that.
but it's in a report, right? Is that okay? Where did you find that?
Okay,
There's a note,
click on that one, yep.
Dr. Weaver, Ms. Pearl just said the latest report came out on Friday,
Yes,
so therefore we can grab that number out. The last
yep, it
report.
should already be on the NHID website.
Would you give us a number?
Right, this is Jason's text, I'm gonna not modify it myself. Is designated.
Can you get that number to us?
Yeah, I can.
Thanks.
Let's see. So, yeah, again, Jason talked about creating lower costs for biologics. I was just asking for a little bit more comparison between what's happening with generics versus biosimilars versus interchangeability. Define those if this section a little bit more. Next. Insert new as in all new medications are patent protected. I don't think that generic medications are patent protected.
it's kind of the point.
No,
So he's suggesting all of the medications. Yeah, I'm just saying all new. Let's see, next highlight text. It just so, yeah, skip that. I don't know how that. I was asking for, I didn't understand that sentence that's highlighted there. I was asking for a rewrite from him. I don't know whether, can you contact him and on some of these requested rewrites for simplification? Is he available?
I don't know if I'll check his email.
It's just a family vacation.
Right?
What's the email for anyway? I would say again, on this next one, this remind what the secondary aim was. I didn't really pick that up in the text. It's just this next one. Okay, so this, I think, is worth a little bit of thought. He's talking about how the biosimilars are cheaper. But in his table, both tables, both the 21 and 22, there are two biosimilars that seem to be more expensive per prescription than the brand names. That seems to be contradictory to the concept that we're gonna save money if we push biosimilars.
Pretty sure when he did the analysis, he was talking overall biologics.
I agree, but if we're pushing biosimilars, it just seemed like that was kind of a bad item to put at the table because it's counter the argument of the rest of the text. That's his call,
But you raise a good point. The only thing is that's a category, antineoplastics. It's not a specific drug, which is interesting.
I totally agree.
Yeah,
It is a table that's presented in evidence of an argument that he's trying to make. With the 2 out of 5 table entries or 6
Yeah.
table are counterproductive. If he wants to leave it exactly the way it is, I'm happy with doing it. It's just if I were an outside reader going, how much are we gonna really save? I wouldn't be convinced.
well, what'd be interesting to find out in that category, how many drugs, distinct drugs, biologics, if you will, are in the category on the left side and how many are on the right side?
I have those.
Because if there's like 10 or 12 over here, we're not mapping over here,
Yeah,
because
that's
maybe
relatively
biological.
what had happened.
So,
I have the actual numbers, but
so what I'm trying to understand is we have biologics, but they may not have biosimilars.
correct.
So you raise a good point, Doctor.
It just, I don't know the answer, but sorting it out, even, we're in the sort of last minute, we got
Yeah.
48 hours to do this. One solution would be delete those categories.
Yep.
Another solution would be to subdivide those categories so that, in a subset of neoplastic or I can't.
So,
read it.
if I understand
How about a
correctly,
footnote? How just about a footnote there?
Any of the above. We're in.
Footnote with the
we're getting
numbers
report
further drilling
out,
down.
need time. Yeah.
is it possible, the would be not helpful too, is it possible in the time we have to take the anti-neoplastics and then underneath there have a subset, one with no biosimilars and one with biosimilars?
I think it's,
Or
it's your call to how to modify with the table, footnote at least.
Footnotes at least, are you saying a category of like angioplastics, not comparing to the biosimilar?
Well, being sure that what's over here in biosimilars, that we're capturing the same biologics on the other side. Because if you have a biologic that has no biosimilar, then we're not comparing apples to apples.
Correct.
So how do we compare apples to apples? How do we somehow be sure that the antineoplastic that are biologics, the ones that have a biosimilar, we're capturing the same drug?
I'd have to go back and look, but I do believe every biologic had at least one biosimilar that I've got reported from the jury.
So in the biologics, they're biologic with no biosimilars.
I don't believe there are in this. I think I pulled out the ones that didn't have biosimilars, but I can go back and double check that. Definitely at least a footnote. And I have the
footnote,
numbers
sure.
for how many are
Yeah.
in each category.
That would be helpful because it's like the same thing with the Medicare that you raised before, Dr. Woodward.
Yeah.
The Medicaid, looking at it is the same thing. It's, I put a footnote, is that is an interesting result that justifies further investigation,
Yes.
because that's what we're trying to get at, is why is that happening? We don't know. We need to find out.
So if you click on the double question mark. What that was for. Oh, just your strategy, payment options of biosimilars, creating, purchasing, cooperative for farmers of benefit manager. I didn't
It's
quite
A.
understand the,
It's creating a purchasing cooperative.
okay. Purchase.
It's up there with the mouse.
Yeah.
Sorry
And then click on the next one.
about that.
So my understanding of PDEB is that we can propose legislation, but we can't implement a strategy. We don't have implementation ability, right?
That's clear. That was one of my comments. the PDAB recommends strategies. The PDAB does not implement.
Did we pricing?
So just put in, it can propose legislation to implement the strategy.
Consider
Would-
recommending.
Yeah,
I think it says recommend strategic approaches. Yeah, Yeah.
Yeah, your wordsmithing is good.
Recommend strategies.
Okay, on the next one. Click on the next. So I'm not an expert. But I've been told. At least once. That the vast majority of New Hampshire public employees. Are covered under one. Prescription benefit manager already. So the question is whether there are, and I don't know whether that's right. I meant these comments not to modify, but to raise questions.
may I jump in on the
Of
same
course,
paragraph?
Yes,
Okay. So to me, this paragraph represents an economic theory. I don't believe that the board has agreed that this is a valid approach to reducing pricing by consolidating the PBMs. So I would weasel word this
Okay.
in the sense of talking about, instead of saying something definitive like aggregating PBMs is an approach to reducing, I would disclaim that with a maybe.
May.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then in the third sentence down, second word in, it says can potentially, I guess that's fine. But I'd make that a may. I guess I'd want to be a little bit more cautious on declaring what's the right economic theory.
Yeah, that's a
Because
good
we
point.
kind of got to where we are, as chaotic as it is, because there's been a free market trying to figure out pricing, right?
Well,
No, okay, no, that's a great comment, because there's an economic theory here that we should talk through a little bit, right?
the one thing we talked about before was, is there an opportunity for us to aggregate PBMs on public payers,
Who is we?
the state?
No, but seriously, who in the state would do that?
we could,
That's the
we're
question.
recommending that the towns and the.
Municipalities, school boards and so forth within the public payers, the
Yeah.
university system and so forth.
So having spent some time in the Army writing strategies and the like, the most of this is missing to me is, who does what, when. There's this sort of like floats here a little bit in a way in which these recommendations are not particularly accountable or attached.
I think these are what the intent was. These are things for the board to consider strategies for the coming year.
Does it say that in the first paragraph? I don't know that it says that in the first paragraph. So like, even if it said it in the first paragraph, that the following represents discussion areas for the board in the coming year.
Fair.
Then
It's recommendations to the board.
that kind of contextualizes everything that follows and it assigns who's accountable for doing what, which is kind of my thing.
Correct. And I think we're make the changes. Good points. Is trying to sit there at this point in time, it's a recommendation to the board. For the board consideration to decide at that point in time, do they want to,
Okay,
and then once they do that.
Yeah.
In other words, who doesn't?
yeah,
So all the
no,
things you're asking about. if we have
that's
to-
great.
yeah.
So I'm sorry, I'm kind of late to the party, but that's how I react when I read the strategy piece. It's not just clear on. In the Army, you take somebody and say, okay, you do that,
But we,
My last comment.
Yeah.
Actually, if you click on the last comment. So this question about price, about transparency in PBM. I think is perhaps one of the most. Important options that we have. To try and call people's attention to the lack of transparency. And to make recommendations about how transparency can be improved. I mean, one of the troubles is that if you aggregate, I did a paper once on, did an analysis, being in public. Barnes Hospital in St. Louis and Jewish Hospital in St. Louis and Christian Hospital in St. Louis merged. And all of the discussion was all the savings that would be accrued from their doing that. Okay, I got the Medicare cost reports for the years before and the years after the Barnes Jewish Christian Healthcare System, BJCHS, was formed. Were there any savings, in particular in overhead? For example, when the Jewish maternity service was merged with the Barnes maternity service, which were a block apart, The answer is no, there was none in the overhead. The overheads before and the overheads after were exactly the same. There was a little bit of savings actually in cost per delivery, because the merge attracted more mothers, or there was a spike in births in St. Louis, over the merging period. So you need to be really careful about merging like PBMs is going to save money.
I don't think then here is to merge the PBMs, it's more to merge the buyers of the PBMs. In other words, if you have consolidation on the seller side, which is what the PBMs are, they're selling a product into the market.
They're selling their services, but
Right. But the buyers themselves are not coalescing, are not aggregating. In other words, if the University of New Hampshire uses a PBM, Medicaid uses a PBM, State of New Hampshire uses a PBM, municipalities use PBM, they're all buyers of PBM services.
So this paragraph in 20, if that's the right paragraph, doesn't say what you just said. This paragraph starts with a very declarative aggregating the PBMs. It doesn't say anything about improving the coordination of prescription buyers.
Correct. Now, I'm not talking about trying to aggregate the PBMs, I'm talking about trying to aggregate the buyers of the PBMs.
Right.
So the way I said it there is incorrect.
Right, because if you read
Yeah,
that, to
I
your
see.
point,
Yes.
if there's just some presumption this board's gonna indicate a consolidation in the industry, that would be,
That's not what we're
I
saying.
don't think that's what we're
No,
looking
no.
to do or that we're empowered to
Yeah,
do.
yeah. I mean, one needs to be careful in general about monopolies. And, if you have
Yeah.
one PBM. Or even a purchasing co-op, one needs to be a little bit careful about the wielding of monopoly powers that then,
The way this is written is incorrect.
gotcha.
But I think that's a
We-
brilliant
we-
point.
That's a good point.
It's a brilliant point, but I think it might be something that has to go on to, we have to maybe look at that further as a board to say, this is what the board has found out, and maybe, because we do have laws against monopolies in New Hampshire.
Yeah.
And if that's a strategy in the future to say, the board recognizes this is the law relative to perhaps further investigation is necessary, that would certainly, I think, be within our purview and not be overstepping. So you're gonna have to rewrite that, is that what you're saying? Mr. Chair?
Yes, I'm trying to get to, I think the way it would be on page 20 is, where it says aggregating buyers of pharmacy benefit managers.
Aggregating or improving the coordination between.
Coordination, something like that. But
I
it's
I
the
like that
buyers
better,
of,
yes.
but it's the buyers of PBM services, not the PBM themselves.
Right.
Yeah.
So I would be about improving coordination between them as a first step and not go straight to the consolidation of the five. Just me.
That's fine.
And this question of what the state can do to improve the transparency of PBM pricing, I think is a place where there is potential savings.
Isn't that, Dr. Woodard, in this first paragraph, there's nothing in here that just starts out that as I've always understood the macro strategy of the PDAB, it's that through improved pricing transparencies, it improves the ability of buyers to negotiate better pricing on the basis of actual known costs. That's the essential strategy that we believe we're operating under. That's not in here. in the opening paragraph. And I just, it's kind of a first principles issue. Have we said it so often we no longer need to say it? Or should this opening paragraph under strategies talk about our core strategy, which is to improve the leverage of buyers through enhanced price transparency? Am I saying that wrong,
Yes,
Dr.
no,
Ward?
No, I like
And that's really, I think we're trying to get to is that if you have, the more we can consolidate the buyers into a PBM at that point in time, the more, I think, the point to Edwards, part of the issue with PBMs is the question of having access to the data. What's going on, because that's what transparency is all about, is what are the price points. But right now, we don't have a good way to look at the market,
Right.
look what's going on.
Right,
You
so
know,
do
that
any of these
visibility.
subsequent detailed strategies talk about making the data more transparent?
that.
Because if not, then maybe we missed, you know,
Well, we talked about as far as the goals of next year, looking at, one of the things we talked about as a goal is finding out, do we have access to the appropriate data? And then number two, if we do, the people who need access to it, do they have access to it?
which number are you looking at where we're trying to talk about data
10
transfer?
and 11,
11?
access adequacy of data needed for the board to make its objectives. And 11, access board staff or board members have appropriate access to the data needed for the board to make.
Okay, so let's just for the sake of discussion, say I completely agree with goal 11.
Correct.
It would be nice, I think, for logical consistency to have a strategy listed to where you could attach goal 11. So like now that we have these 11 goals, these goals should somehow tie back into these strategies that we're going to pursue. And I don't know that they do, I haven't mapped them.
They haven't.
Should we worry
we?
about it?
The question is whether you have time to.
I don't have time to do it.
Okay.
This has to go out by the 1st of November.
All right,
So that's the time constraint we're under.
okay,
So I hear what you're saying. I think the future iterations of it is looking at that whole thing, is trying to find somebody who's not a volunteer, who's got the time to write.
we should
an
hire
report.
somebody.
We should, but you know,
Director.
but you know something,
Great idea.
we're working on one. That's Edwards.
I don't know why you haven't done that.
But I don't, everything you're saying, I totally agree with.
All right,
It's a time constraint.
okay, I'm good with that.
So thank you very much for your attention.
Just one more little
Yeah, go
point.
ahead.
You want to put somewhere in there that that's not an exhaustive list of things the board might do in 2024.
Yeah.
You want to say without limitation, comma. So
Right.
start some sentence to say without
Yeah.
limitation. The board will do or might do that. Just that, just a thought.
Disclaimer.
Yeah,
And I think what I could do at the same time
Oh, yeah.
is on here to Representative Edwards. One of the strategies maybe at that point in time is to weave this together with the goals in the back is looking at these goals.
Yeah.
So it brings it together. So therefore, at that point in time, one of the strategies is looking at the goals for the coming year. Are there opportunities within the goals themselves to develop or identify additional strategies?
All right,
I just trying to think of a way to
I like
tie it
that.
together.
One last comment on your prescribed smaller quantities. My personal experience is that when you buy 90-day prescriptions, they're typically cheaper per pill than our 30-day prescriptions. You're talking about waste, especially at the beginning. I think it makes sense to have the practice being 30-day, perhaps for an initial prescription.
Yes.
But once somebody's on a statin, they are on a statin for life. And once they found that statin works, getting 90-day prescriptions, it makes more sense. So to modify that, prescribe smaller quantities, I'd say initially or something like that.
So May. initially. Okay.
Nice report. Thank you.
Yeah,
Good work.
I apologize for not giving my comments sooner.
No, it's, hopefully the next report will be,
Hopefully I'll still be around. Depends on if they give me my meds.
that's basically the extent. I'm gonna do is go back. I'll be here for a little bit of time. We go over this with you, make some edits.
Today.
Today or tomorrow, which is better for you.
Oh, I mean. I don't know. Can we do it virtually?
Yeah.
Yeah, fine.
And then the insurance department, you'll get that number as far as the medical. Okay. All right. So as far as the upcoming board minutes. The future dates, we have one for December 18th. After that, I don't know what people want to do. How often you want to meet?
Oh, are you gonna give us an update on the executive director status?
Yes.
All right, good morning, everybody, or almost afternoon. I reached out to the board's number one candidate. I exchanged some emails with them. We came to an agreement on salary as well as start date. So now the next step is for me to draft a formal letter offering the position to the candidate. And then from there, we can proceed to GNC and get full approval.
So things, the summary I would take from your summary is things are looking positive.
Correct.
Nice.
What's your projected start date?
January 22nd.
22nd?
Yep. And I did confirm with the HR that that would be acceptable, provided we get through the GNC process, but given the GNC process, that's a good start date, because it does take some time.
You know, given the holidays and so forth with the
Yeah.
schedule. Yeah. Finally. So,
No, this guy is a really sharp cookie.
any more discussion? So December 18th is the next board meeting. What is the desire of the board for future meetings? How often should we meet? We've been doing sort of ad hoc. I think it'd be better if we try to get it on sort of a routine schedule.
It happens that legislatively, my best day for flexibility is Mondays.
Yeah.
Or Mondays.
Concur.
You know, you all with serious schedule.
Well, it isn't that they're more serious, it's just that they're more prescribed. You know,
Okay.
there is a meeting you shall be at.
I take the
Yeah.
modification.
Yeah.
Okay. So do it again at 9:30?
9:30 works, or
Does
is
that work?
It's good.
Todd said,
9:30 work?
It does. I'm just wondering if there's gonna be a January 24th start date, whether we ought to meet in January in advance of that start date on the 18th or thereabouts, whatever that Monday is. In that vicinity, I don't know.
Meet before the executive director shows up. or
Maybe,
meet
yeah,
Like
prob-
immediately after. Maybe for that month, meet after the 22nd so that we could meet him.
We could. Yeah, we could do that too.
Whatever works for you guys.
Be starting on the 22nd,
That's the date we agreed to, yes.
so we give at least a week to figure out where the cafeteria is and restaurant and all that stuff. 29th,
Good with me.
Sure.
and do you want to wait until the 29th to determine when we have additional meetings?
You guys know how you want to operate. I assume you want to set it up like on the third Monday of every month so that we have a algorithm, right?
I'm trying to get to, yeah.
Yeah, I'll do anything you want to do with a Monday.
whoa,
Yeah. Cause they already are.
If I can just be clear about, so the executive director, who's gonna give the charge and sort of the work plan? Who's gonna be in charge of this executive director creating it? Okay, so a whole work plan and goals and objectives and everything that needs, there's gonna be a lot to onboard this person.
Yes,
So
there is.
you're gonna be onboarding this person. With
From
his-
that point of view, Mr. Barry will be onboarding him from the operational part of it, you know, his office, his telephones, equipment, and things of that nature. I'll be doing more to what you're talking about is the goals and objectives and things of that nature.
Does he have a place to sit? I mean,
He did at one point and it's gone now, so I have to work on that. But, I'll get there.
It'll just be amazing if he has a computer. It always seems like that's the hardest thing. It's just to get somebody a computer.
The computer will be the easy part, it's finding a chair, it will be the hard part.
You can have this one.
Right, I have a bunch of extra chairs.
You'd be surprised.
I'll donate them. Not a
You-
conflict, I don't think.
Do you want to shoot for like the last, we're gonna do this either the fourth Friday of the last Friday. We could stay with the fourth Friday, that's Friday, Monday, thank you,
that's more dependable, but the last can be,
the fourth
can
Monday,
be the fifth. Can it?
yeah, maybe.
So,
Fourth Monday of each month,
yes,
starting in February, because the last Monday in January is the 29th. So go for the 29th, which to give him a week to get his feet grounded. And then we'll meet him on the 29th. Then we'll meet the fourth Friday thereafter at 9:30. Monday.
My hope is that some of the onboarding him will be listening to his suggestions
Right.
and
Oh, yeah.
interests. That it's not, you know, here's the job, here's what we want you to do, or do it. This, he should have a fair amount of flexibility. I think he knows the industry and the subject matter well enough to have some ideas himself about how some of the legislative within the legislative bounds, things that he might be interested in doing. That we might not think of, a conversation back and forth.
I would say this, Bob, to your point, Dr. Woodward. I'll meet with him initially, but I also think it's important that the board meets with the gentleman. That with the candidate at that point in time, but the board themselves provide some input to him, so it's not just myself driving this, it's a board collectively. I'm there to represent the intent of the board as a whole, and not to basically take my thoughts, if you will, and drive it that way. Once the board has reached that kind of consensus, then I can work towards driving it. But I think the initial part of it should be done by the board with the gentleman.
So, and the first time he showed up, if it were just a greeting to get to know each other, to associate names and faces, I would have very low expectations of him coming in prepared to tell us much of anything other than how happy he is to be here.
You should look at his CV.
I have.
Have you clicked on some of the things he's written? They've been pretty deep. It's at the back of the CV, there's a list of publications. And each of those.
I can get it to represent it, please.
Yes,
Yeah.
actually, this is an issue, just the board has been sending us PDFs created by. Faxing or photocopying the documents as opposed to the PDF itself that's searchable and
clickable, yeah, I can create one of those, actually.
just as a protocol, when stuff gets sent. Rather than, I mean, the only way I could do those comments detailed was for me to have the optical character recap capability in PDF, create an optical character readable. If that's sort of going around in circle, when you could send me the PDF created from the Word file.
Yeah, I can do that,
Yeah.
I had one horrible thing to say about the annual report, and maybe I should just shut up, but
Go for it.
But, do we want to worry about a bibliography? Because you had mentioned one specific reference, or you did. You mentioned pulling a number from a specific reference. And that triggers me to have nightmares of, having to do bibliography citations.
Doctor has done a very good job
You did.
of doing that in his section.
Yeah,
And it would be, I think, relatively easy for you, when you pull a number, to include a citation for that.
That sentence actually already has a citation from last year's annual report. So I can pull the number from last year's annual report, or I can pull it from this year's and just have to change the year on the citation.
Yeah, so his is done, on my first section, all the sources of data were in the graph.
okay,
Click them essentially by copying and pasting.
okay,
The second section was Medicaid management information system data coming from HHS directly. And I have said that in the text up front.
Right. okay,
But there's no document
Right.
that other than the calculations, the numbers that were provided me from that system.
I still have PTSD from that. Having to come up with citations, so I will defer to you all on how serious you want to get about that.
So right now, as far as the future meeting dates, we have December 18th, January 29th, and the fourth Friday thereafter,
Fourth Monday.
Monday. It'll be Friday.
Yeah,
Is that enough time?
I can't make Mondays or Fridays.
Fourth Monday. All right, that takes care of future meetings. Before we move on, I also should have a vote by the board to accept the annual report as discussed with its edits. Is that
So moved.
so moved? We have a motion by second. All those in favor say aye.
All right,
Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. All right, now on to public comments.
Yes. you can.
Yes, good morning.
Yes.
Heidi Kroll with Gallagher, Callahan and Gartrell for AHIP. I haven't had a chance to go through the whole report. I was just kind of following along with what you were talking about, but in the introduction on page 4, you were talking earlier about the you've cited the legislation, and my only comment on that piece might be to actually put the citation in quotes and then cite the RSA. And then that way the reader knows that, I'm looking at this paragraph here, where you were talking about the 10-year average, rolling average of the medical care services component of the United States Department of Labor, PLL statistics, and then plus a reasonable percentage for inflation. Like all of that language comes directly from the law. So maybe just quoting everything that came from the law and citing the statutory reference.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good catch. Anything else? Is there any comments, people on the Zoom?
No.
No? All right. Then I'll take a motion to adjourn.
motion to adjourn.
So move for a second.
Slow. Well, let's stay fun.
It's the only motion I'm quick on.
All those in favor, adjourn, say aye.
All right.
Aye.
Aye, we're adjourned. Thank you all for helping out with the